Hi,
Hello.
I'm Julian.
I'm Innie and Outie, Tom.
We are Team Binge. We are here to talk about Severance Season 2, Episode 3. This one is called Who is Alive? Tom, there is a lot to talk about in this episode. I'm not going to lie, I watched this later than normal, and this is a trippy show to watch while you're falling asleep. But I enjoyed it. There were some, we'll say, slow parts, and I have a lot of questions. But yeah, still enjoying it. And I know that you want to dive deep into some stuff. But the deepest dive we'll take is, Tom, did you enjoy this episode?
I did, man. Like, we talked through the first two episodes were a lot of setup or picking back up from the first season. Like, what were the innies doing? What is their reactions to the conclusion of season one? And then what were the outies doing? So now we're kind of getting really, I think, into season two. Like, they kind of set the board up, and now we're seeing where the characters are going to go. So they kind of, our innies kind of split up. We still get the mix of both innie and outie in this episode. And I thought it was a lot of fun, man. It just keeps going down the rabbit hole, answers a couple questions, but then continues to just ask so many more. So I love the show. I dig it.
Good, 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 good. Now, you brought this up to me, and I don't think I noticed because no one's quicker to hit the skip title or skip recap, or I'm the quickest draw in the West when it comes to skipping something for a TV show. But they redid the entire opening credits, and so I'm going to give you the floor. I've watched it. Didn't care for people crawling out of people's heads, but that's just me. Tom, talk through the new opening credits.
Yeah, I think this is fun. This is kind of reminiscent. I mean, obviously, it's the same style and artistry of the first season, but they're re-upping it here. So I think we got a lot of clues about what was going to happen in the first season from the intro or opening credits in the first season. So now that we're kind of getting a new one, it's like you can just theorize about all this, which I think is a lot of fun. I also dig a show that uses its opening credit sequence to do things like
You
this.
love
I think
it.
yeah,
You
like
love
the
it.
after party
You
and the other Apple
love
TV
searching
show.
through the credits. You love it so much.
Yeah. It had some of these fun elements where like little bits of it were directed pieces for upcoming episodes. So I love it. So I mean, we got balloon heads. They're searching through a green brain. I thought the green brain was interesting just because we have a lot of interesting color palettes in the show. So it being green, I thought was interesting. We got the babies in suits. We
Didn't
got a
care
frozen.
for them. Didn't care for babies in suits. Babies should never be that formal. That's my
were.
official approach.
Very much like Boss Baby, just a bunch of little Alec Baldwin babies.
Great.
There's like a car in a frozen lake. I don't know if it's Mark's. I don't know. I don't think it's reminiscent of Gemma's accident because I think she hit a tree, but I don't know. Maybe we'll get a car accident in a frozen lake at some point in the episode. There's like pills on the table. The Marks working together I thought was really cool because we kind of knew that was going to happen, but what we got at the end of this episode of them kind of reintegrating and how they were actively helping each other in the opening credits, I thought was fun.
So when you say the marks working together, you mean like the orange suited mark and the business, so the outer mark and the inner mark? I'm not saying outie and innie. I'm going to refuse. So you're talking about those two parts of Mark working together when you say that?
Yeah, they're like he's like opening up the curtains, or he's pulling them through the door, or yanking him out of like the thing out of his brain. Like they seem to be actively working together, and now we know potentially them being reintegrated. Will be fascinating to see where we go with them or with Mark's character this rest of the season. We got the creepy look of like Cobell's face, versus it's all like a big light, and then you got Gemma and Helly taking the elevator, and their bodies kind of like flipping back and forth, which is kind of cool. And then, of course, the pièce de résistance is the baby Kier crawling at his feet, which was just so wildly creepy and might still play into the idea of they're trying to rebuild Kier's consciousness in, I don't know necessarily in the form of a baby, but I thought it was fun. And then there's a lot of things I think we'll keep going back to these credits as the season goes on to try to tie meaning to it.
Yeah, once again, the human baby stuff, or I guess not human baby, adult baby stuff, did not care for. The way this is done just made me think that Ben Wyatt from Parks and Rec ultimately made his masterpiece, and it is the intro for this show, because that's who I think of when I look at Adam Scott's beautiful, beautiful face. But I'm glad you enjoyed the opening credits. You made me watch them. And sure, I'm sure it shed a lot of light on a very confusing show.
Yes.
But we're going to dive into this one nicely. It's almost like the creators listen to us. They have kind of taken the characters all in their own direction so we can talk character to character. And I'd like to start with old Milkshake himself, Milchek. When he enters, there are the half deflated or deflated balloons. Was this supposed to show passage of time? Was this just supposed to show that Mark didn't appreciate his gift of balloons? This all leads to him being called into Natalie and the board. But why are there half deflated balloons? Was this a passage of time thing, Tom?
I think it's almost maybe a little bit, but like the idea that Mark didn't appreciate the gift and almost kind of a sense for his state of affairs with the company. Like he seems very deflated and nobody's like respecting him kind of right now. So him kind of taking the balloons angrily and taking them to his office, I think is kind of I think you can take multiple meanings to it.
We'd like to ask Reddit how long it takes for balloons to deflate to that level. Please give us a timeline. We will be waiting. We have... So Natalie is a character I find fascinating. Her eyes tell a story that is either super creepy or super innocent or super murdery. I don't know. I find her fascinating, but I have no idea. I don't have a read on this character.
Yeah, I agree. Like the way she's almost in this scene, she seems to be kind of smiling, but then her lips are kind of quivering and she's eyes are just super big and like bulging. But she's kind of like the voice of the board where she has that headset on and she's speaking for them. And even like the language she uses is just like wild and unique. She is a very fascinating character, agreed.
I don't watch modern horror films, but a lot of them that they give me in commercials are people like looking really friendly, but you know they're evil, and that's kind of the vibe I get from her. Almost like someone who is not in control of what's happening with their face or eyes.
Yeah.
And so don't care for it. Not a big fan. The other thing...
She does.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one more thing about her. She seems trapped, right? Like she's almost seems like her subconscious is kind of trying to come out, but she's forced to say these things and do everything else.
I think
like it's disturbing.
That is a great way of describing it, Tom. Trapped. And not the 2000s band that we all knew and love. I think they sang Headstrong, maybe? I don't know. Anyways.
Ooh, good call. I like that call in.
Thank you. The other thing I don't appreciate, Tom, is when paintings are redone. I like the originals. Actually, that makes this sound terrible based on what they do with this painting. So I'm going to retract that statement. But they redo these like weird Kier religion paintings and they add in black people. And Milchek doesn't seem all that excited about it. I mean, he ends up hiding them in the end. I don't know if this is a call to like, hey, corporate, sometimes you try and bring inclusion and instead it just seems kind of strange. I don't know what the show is trying to tell us here.
I think essentially they're just trying to make sure like Milchek is on board, but man, is this wildly disturbing that this is the route that they go of taking these pictures and paintings we've already seen throughout the first season and you try to change it in his image. And I think he even said at one point, he's like, oh, I see myself reflected, and clearly they want him to see himself in Kier's image, but he can't even finish the sentence. Like he's so wildly disturbed by this, and it's so blatantly racist.
Right. It is it's strange. The Milchek character I love because he can swing from like menacing to friendly to now you kind of see maybe like fraying on the edges in terms of his like loyalty to the company just based on now that he's in this management role. So I'm fascinated to see where old Milkshake goes. But in
where
the
that
end,
shakes out.
Yeah, very good, Tom. Yes, very good. But in the end, he does, I guess he's in like the supply closet and he's tucking them away on the top shelf, which is anytime you need to hide something in this office, you just go to the top shelf of that supply closet.
Yeah, it's smart. But I do like this, right? Because we thought that Milchek was very
a company
much...
man.
Exactly, right? So this is kind of now sowing the seeds of doubt in him, which I love that they're adding more depth to him because he's fantastic.
He is great. Then we have kind of the rest of the office, and this is set up by Mark has made some very cute, very like what a child would do when the dog is missing, even though we all know that dog's gone and dead. He's made missing posters for Miss Chase. And pretty good drawing. I don't know if they freehand or traced this, but pretty good.
I mean, we know Irv is a talented artist. Maybe Irv did this, but
that's fair.
I don't get... like they're trying to do this discreetly, but they're handing this like bright blue paper out to each other and walking around in the halls, and they kind of already know they're being listened to, and I think they even make mention of it, like Lumen is listening. It's kind of interesting that they're not trying to hide it, I guess, as much, but I guess they feel like they have a free pass to kind of do whatever they want as long as they keep data refining.
Yeah, Mark he makes the comment like, "Hey, they told us like no more cameras, no more listening, and that we were free to move about the cabin now that we've hit elevation." So, yeah, to your point, I don't know what Lumen has got in store for these poor kids who have lost their dog. Speaking of lost dogs, Helly and Mark are going off together. We've got a little co-adventure, and they mention the goat people, which is where they end up, and then Dylan doesn't seem to want to join in the fun, and I'm assuming that is because in the back of his mind, he is thinking about what we get in this episode, which is the family visitation room. So Dylan's now, even though he was probably the biggest rebel, he's now on his best behavior. And then Irv has come back to missing Bert, and he is afraid to go over to O&D because I'm assuming it'll bring up bad memories. That it's Bert, right? Did I get that name?
Okay. Yeah. And I think, he's definitely reserved for it. But I think even before he goes out, he does have that quick conversation with Dylan talking about, hey, man, I drew the hallways, I drew the door, and trying to get him to help him with the mystery, because obviously they had a real big heart-to-heart in the first episode about trying to kind of stay together, work together, and Dylan pretty much telling him like, hey man, I'm not interested, I gotta keep working on my numbers here, is interesting. And it's kind of fascinating to see Dylan kind of maybe start turning against his fellow workers here.
Yeah, I think his motivation is, well, they don't know what his motivation is because he's not allowed to tell them about the room. But I think he's right to I mean, he's just doing his job, He's sitting there. He said he's in a groove. I mean, once you're in the groove, dropping numbers in buckets, it's tough to get shaken out of it. I mean,
He wants to earn the awards, man. He's had the waffle party. He's gotten the portraits. He's gotten the finger cuffs. He wants that Audi room.
I'm assuming waffle party means something in the Urban Dictionary. I would almost argue it's grosser. It's almost grosser in this show, whatever it means. Ugh. All right, let's go down the hallway with Mark and Helly. They have this awkward moment where it's like, are they going to kiss? They're not going to kiss. They don't really know how to be around each other. And, I don't know if this is young love or he's worried about who's watching them in this really white hallway. I don't know. I just know it was awkward and they should have either both gone for it or shook hands like normal romantic partners do.
I feel like this was almost one of the biggest clues we've gotten so far that this is not Helly, right? Like this is Helena, because we saw Helly like very confidently go and give him a kiss and like they left in that instance. And now this person that is walking the hallway and having this awkward back and forth with Mark just doesn't seem like the same person. And we saw Helena like watch the video, watch the tape, and just seem fascinated by the love that these two characters had. And she doesn't know how to respond to it now that she's in it. So I'm still very much in the camp of this being Helena and not the Helly that we knew and loved from season 1.
Okay, I think you're wrong. I think this is still Helly, but this is Helly with more information because she knows she's an Egan and she knows what's happening, and it's dishonest of her to like carry on this kind of any relationship with Mark without she didn't share who she was or any of those things. So I think it's more of that rather than this being Helena. But I'm willing to be wrong. Will I admit that I'm wrong once I find out I'm wrong? No. But I'm willing for other people to think I'm wrong, I guess is the best way.
Yep.
I do want to point out, and you and I have talked about the visuals of this show, this like hallway walk was super cool where the light like kind of lingers as they pass the section and then the new light kicks on. And it was just visually a very cool shot. And this is probably about the moment where it hypnotized me into falling asleep. And so I started to fade right around here. But I did think this was very cool. And that hallway leads to a smaller hallway, which leads to Goatland. And here's what I want to say about this episode. And it gets, in this moment, this episode goes weird. Not that the show's not weird, but this goes real weird. And I don't appreciate a show that keeps giving you more weirdness without answers. And by the end of this episode, I had the fear that they can just like pile on the weirdness. If they're not going to explain it, I'm going to be upset. So I'm hoping that we get to the Goatland, like what it all means. But this is where I got a little bit nervous, if I can be honest about the show.
I think that's fair. I mean, there is so much like goat symbology throughout the first season. Like we had the baby goats being fed in that one. I think you could even go back to like Audie Mark's house and you can see like goat sculptures in the background. When he had the waffle party, there was a dude like dressed up as a goat. So I think we needed to clearly go back and experience and understand what is going on with the goats from the first season. But I'm with you. Like, sure, we found out a little bit more and there's now this new department that we're getting to meet. But it is asking a lot more questions about what is going on with the greater scheme of what Lumen is doing. But I do love the way this was shot, how they're kind of going down, not necessarily a rabbit hole, but going down a goat hole, very reminiscent of like Alice in Wonderland, like the smaller room that they're crawling, having to actually crawl physically in, avoid poop as they go through.
Sure.
I thought was pretty fun.
Right. Goat hole is also something you don't want to go and do any research on. There's a man in a goat suit. He looks like he's living his best life. They are accosted by a extremely tall woman with shears, and we are informed this department, I'm going to give this a go, Tom, without getting in trouble because we are a podcast for children, the mammalian nurturable.
Mammalian nurturable, yeah. And like
you said that so flawlessly. You sir can get out. How dare you make me do it only to show the people how terrible I am at pronunciation. I messed up pronunciation. That's the best part.
This show just introducing us to like fetid moppet and then now mammalian nurturable. Like it's just, I love the weird, crazy language they're using for it. But man, I was so excited to see the formidable Gwendolyn Christie show up on the show, and her first line being like, "Hey, are you here to kill me?" She has like shears like ready to stab away.
Right.
And again, so great to see her on the show, and keeps pushing the concept of all these different divisions are afraid of each other, right? Like we call the same kind of thing when they ran into O&D, and now we're kind of seeing the same thing here, where everybody assumes everybody's out for each other.
Right. No one wants to get reduced out of the company, so they're all afraid of the other departments. She's Game of Thrones, right? That's where we know her from?
Yes, Brienne of Tarth of Game of Thrones.
There
Fantastic.
we go. That's the one. I was like, she's familiar, but I don't know a lot of 8-foot-tall women, so I should have guessed. But so this leads to Mark sitting down with her and asking her about Gemma, and she plays it off, and then he realizes that she knows her.
I think, again, I love her verbiage. She's like, I don't abide such flipperies here.
Sure.
She's not having it.
Sure.
And I loved her language. I love that the way she set it up. And then her kind of essentially ringing the bell is a cowbell. Like, I absolutely love, and this has to be a call to
Christopher Walken?
Yes, the Christopher Walken, and then I got a fever for the cowbell, right? Like, it's too great.
Sure. I mean, I think there are people in the world that use cowbells for legitimate reasons. It's not always an homage to the Blue Oyster Cult skit in SNL. But if you put this together with Christopher Walken, then yes, they're definitely got a fever for more goat bell, though. Is this not a goat bell, not a cowbell?
That's a fair point. I'm still calling it a cowbell, though.
It's made by Lumen, though. I don't know if you noticed that. It is made by Lumen. Yes. It's got the Lumen label.
It's more of a goat people bell, right? Because this brings in all of the people all around this area to just encircle our team here.
Sure. The goat people bell. Give me more goat people bell, as they like to say. All right. We find out that Miss Casey did visit this department, that Sheer Lady eventually admits to knowing her.
Yeah, so she was doing some form of well-being for these people, and it does kind of have her drop her guard a little bit and say, hey, we're not going to hinder your search if you want to keep trying to figure out, because they just assumed that she was retired and no longer with the company.
Right. Now, they become best friends, the goat people, and Mark and Helly, or Helena, as you like to refer to her as. But before they leave, they have to show their bellies. Tom, what in the sweet world is happening in this moment? See, pouchless? What happened here, Tom? They're not kangaroos. Goats don't have pouches. What's happening here?
It proves nothing. That guy's response was great. I don't know, but I'm here for it. I love the weirdness of it all. Like, it almost makes me think, are they like experimenting on animals and things like that? I mean, clearly these goats have to be here for some form of an experiment, whether they're poking and prodding them and using them to put in severance chips, or they're cloning them, or who knows what. But for these people to think that they're some form of marsupial is bananas.
Sure. I assume they're just making goats as emotional support animals, and everyone gets to care for one. I just don't know a person that's been betrayed by a pouch person before, so when she's very suspicious of, I guess she hates kangaroos or marsupials, I don't know. All right, so a lot of weirdness there. Once again, no answers, just weirdness, other than the fact that Miss Casey, I guess, exists and has visited other departments, so it's not just in his brain. Unless this is all happening in Mark's brain, then who knows. Let's go to Irv. Irv goes and visits O&D.
Which I've kind of forgotten the first season. This is optics and design is what O&D stands for, because they have, I guess, in charge of all the paintings, and they also seemingly 3D print a bunch of weird white objects. So fun to be back here.
Yeah, no, they definitely printed that goat person bell, as you call it.
Yeah.
We find Felicity, who was, I guess, like Bert's second or worked with Bert, and Irv and her reminisce about Bert, and Irv still loves Bert. This is all I'm getting from these. Up until the moment he mentions, or at least she sees, Tom, you have a notebook. How many drawings of me do you have in that notebook?
Oh, not enough, man. Not enough.
How many drawings of hallways do you have in that notebook?
13.
13. You got to say just one so we can move the plot along. But she sees his drawing of the hallway, which he's made in his Bert sketchbook, and we find out that it's an exports hall, or at least that's what Felicia calls it, because she's familiar with it.
Yeah, it sounds like all these items and products, whatever, that they are having to make goes through this place. So it's interesting that we finally get a name for this hallway that Irv is obsessed with. And she's saying they send shipments, but now they are not even allowed to go there. And they send somebody else, like some other person, I guess, takes their stuff to there. So I like that we get a name for it. And helps us out as a viewing audience, but still continues a lot of mystery here.
And the only time we've seen something sent down the exports hallway is when Miss Chase or Gemma went there, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So obviously, the office where we're spending most of our time is heaven, and then the exports hall goes to hell. This is all just one big religious allegory. So, listen, I'm back in, Tom. Now that I know what's going on, I'm back in. I don't know what book of the Bible this is. I'll do some research. I'll read it cover to cover again tomorrow, and I'll get back with you with some religious answers.
Please do. Thank you.
Anytime, buddy. All right, let's talk about Dylan. Dylan, the studious and best employee, who he's doing his work, and who shows up but the 9-year-old, 8-year-old Miss Huang, and she takes him over to the security room, which... Anytime a child in business wear has led me down a really white hallway, you gotta assume you're just going to be murdered, right?
Well, and it's funny that they repurpose the security room, right? Like they rebuild it to be this new like Audi hangout center, because he's very much freaking out when he realizes this is where he's going.
Right. We meet Gretchen, so his Audi's wife, and we are informed they have 18 minutes, and
awesome.
They will not get a minute more or less. 18 minutes. Not a whole lot can happen in 18 minutes, so I don't know what they expect here, but it's all being monitored by that 8-year-old girl in business attire. So
it's great. Yeah, she kind of comes over the intercom and like stops her from saying things, but she does throw out a piece of information that I guess our innies didn't know, which was Milchick's first name of Seth, because Indy Dillon here is like, who's Seth?
Right, right. But Gretchen knows Seth. So we're assuming
Yes.
that Gretchen has been briefed by Milchek prior to coming down to. I don't understand what they're doing here. This seems like, once again, we talked about it, a total disregard for the whole Severance procedure. My assumption is Severance helps people do their work so that they're not thinking about the outside world, but this is definitely letting the outside world in. Gretchen informs them that they have 3 kids. They swap stories. It's kind of a cool concept of being like, I'm talking with my spouse with whom I have 3 kids, and he clearly does not like recognize or know them. And so you do get to see like Dylan kind of find this stuff out, and it's kind of cool, but I don't know what the show's trying to tell me here.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating concept, and I think it's showing us that Lumen is struggling to keep
A good
everybody
company
together.
doing good things for good people. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
they're
you,
kind of
Lumen, Lord Lumen.
they're breaking their own rules here, to your point, but I think they need to get Dylan in line because he's the one that was originally in line and kind of stepped out, and they've got to figure out how to do it. And I love this dichotomy between the two of them, where he's kind of asking about the Audi version of himself, and then eventually calls himself a screw up. But it's like a wildly super sweet moment when they eventually hug at the end. She says, "I love you." It's just, it almost reminded me of like Dark Matter, and minor spoilers for Dark Matter for those who haven't seen it. Another pod that or another show we've covered on this pod. But like the idea of you being able to meet another version of your spouse and still form a relationship with them because they still are the same person, even though in this one it's a Audi procedure, and Dark Matter it's like a alternate universe of your loved one. But super cool and fascinating, and I love what they did.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection, but you're right. There is a strong correlation between Dark Matter and this. I would be interested in meeting your other personality, Tom, because anything's better than the current version we have to deal
Thanks,
with
buddy.
on a day-to-day. Oh, it's a compliment when you think about it. If you think about it for a long time, you'll get there.
Okay, because when I thought about it for a short time, it seemed hurtful.
Yeah. No. But your other personality would realize that it was a super rad compliment, and that's why he's radder than you. There's a funny moment in here where she shows Dylan pictures of the family, and they're all dressed in like old, and he's like, "Oh, so we live on a farm." I thought that was fun.
This totally took me back where I think we've got a local place here called Rawhide, which is like an old western town that you can go to. And when I was a kid, me and my 2 brothers and my 2 cousins went to do this picture thing, right? Where you get to dress up as a cool cowboy or whatever, and then get this black and white photo that they print on demand right there for you. It was super cool, super excited about it. I am the most upset I've ever been probably in my life because my brothers both got to wear like cool bandit outfits or cowboy. My cousins are dressed to the nines. The only costume that fit me was a sailor. So I've got this white outfit on with like the little huge collar. I got a dumb little hat on, and I've got the biggest frown on my face. My brothers are having the best time ever.
Well, you didn't create a good enough backstory, Tom. Your brothers were at home, like farming and running off bandits or robbing banks, and you had to go to war, and this was you back home from the war on leave in your sailor outfit.
I've got to find that picture. I'll share it with you. It's great.
Incredible, buddy. Incredible. And the surprising part of the Dylan storyline in this is that we see Audi Dylan at home. He's like watching the kids. His wife, she's either a cop or she's going somewhere in uniform. And he like asks her like, "Hey, what was it like meeting me?" And she does not give him a ton of information.
Yeah, she's almost like holding it from him, and we don't get much, but this is obviously the first Audi Dylan we're getting. But it almost seems he seems like forgetting the cookies. Andy Dylan kind of like made the comment about like him being a big screw up, and not that we're seeing him as a screw up here, but there's some stuff saying that it seems like Gretchen is the one kind of running the family, and he's just sitting on the couch while the kids are watching TV and not proactively kind of helping out. So I think when Gretchen does see Andy Dylan, it kind of, I don't know, she has conflicting ideas of what's going on.
Right, and
in this
who he
relationship.
is. Right. She might end up liking any Dylan more than Audi Dylan. And I like how forgiving you were there. She like clearly explains to him how to make pre-made cookies in like she's talking to, we'll just say, a child. And you're being nice to Audi Dillon. She
Yeah.
has dealt with Audi Dillon for years, and quite frankly, she's over it. Actually, she was pretty friendly to him when Innie
Yeah.
Dillon asked about it. So. All right, let's hop to Rickon and Devin, who we spend a little bit of time with, but essentially Natalie, with her terrified eyes, meets with Rickon, and I guess we find out, which we knew, that his work had made it to the severed floor, and so Natalie's like talking about, I guess, how to maximize that, and gives him the opportunity that maybe he should write a book for the innies. I don't know what they're trying to do to my sweet, sweet Rickon, but I don't like it.
I think they want to take, because they realize that the Innies have taken this as kind of like their new gospel or manual inside, where if they can tweak it enough, and then they've got kind of regained control of how the Innies are seeing this outside world. But I love that they give us a quick little blurb from Rickon's book. It was something in the lines of like, people can't buy expensive wine, and how sadness is the most recurrent issue for facing the poor.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't think sadness is the thing. I think it's probably the other things that lead to sadness.
Hey, my boy
poor,
Rickon
but...
solved it, all right? He knows what's going on. It's if they could cure their sadness, maybe they'd stop being poor. Rickon is he's a saint, you know?
Incredible. But we do get Devin like kind of coming into the conversation here, and she's essentially none too pleased that they're trying to manipulate her husband, and kind of saying, oh yeah, Mark is the best. But she kind of knows like, yeah, that's not the case.
Yeah, Devin is definitely the voice of reason in this whole show, which you've got a lot of strange characters in this show. And so to have Devin being the only like critical, like normal person is a little bit strange. And I look forward to them explaining this. And I bring that up because as we enter the Cobell storyline, so Cobell has like gone on a journey. She's left. And it seems that once you leave this town of Kier, there's nothing but tundra around it. She's like asleep in her car, so there weren't hotel rooms or anywhere else to stay. And she is on a desolate, where that person gets murdered in Fargo.
Yes, it was very Fargo-esque.
Yeah, and then there's a sign that says like Salt Neck 238, which is mileage. So they're just in the middle of nowhere. I did not understand if this is the real world or if this is just to show like how desolate it is once you leave Lumen's glowing light, which all hail Lord Lumen.
Yeah, I was kind of with you. Like, if the closest town is really 238 miles, it does tell us about like how isolated Kier, wherever this really is in America, if it's in America, is. But clearly, I would assume this Salt Neck has a significance for her, because she still has I think it says Charlotte Cobell on it, that breathing tube, which we assume is her mom. Maybe this was where she was born. Like, we still don't really know what to make of it. But seeing this sign and looking back at that little breathing tube in the passenger seat is what turns her around.
Right. So, and I have questions about Cobell's storyline, because she's on this journey. She's left. She's upset. She almost tried to run Mark over, or at least didn't want to answer his question, and Fake almost ran him over. Now she's out here. She turns around. She comes back and she meets with Helena. And her demand of Helena is that she will come back if she can run MDR. So there's some sort of significance, something important about MDR.
Well, and she almost feels like she has unfinished business here. Like, they have a very cold exchange back and forth where they're kind of just measuring each other up. And I think Helena talks about like not having hubris. But I loved Cobell's line back to her. She's like, listen, I earned this. I wasn't born into it, which I thought was brilliant. It almost kind of makes me think like she has to have something on them, right? Or else the company would just murder her or send her off to pasture. Like, I'm
Well,
assuming
Tom,
yeah. What do you think?
I think the murdering almost happens here because Helena convinces her to come back. She's like, let's go to this board meeting. Cobell's following her, and this is shot like anyone that's ever been offed in a gangster film, where she's like following behind, and then the henchman dude's just standing like for her to get close enough to the trunk of that car so she can get thrown in. And I'm assuming that's what Cobell sees that causes her to run away. So I do feel like you're right. She has something on them, and that it does feel like her life is a little bit in danger here.
Yeah, and I feel the way the camera works is done here, where it focuses, like it's originally focused on Helena, and then as the driver kind of steps forward, it kind of focuses the camera on her, and Cobell seems to clock this dude. So it's not just that he's like some evil henchman, but maybe there was some sort of relationship with Cobell and this driver, which causes her to freak out too.
Yeah, she notices that he's from the other department, MRD, which stands for the murder department, Tom.
Yes.
And she's about to get MRD'd. Here's what I didn't like about this. Cobell, like, this whole thing is Cobell leaves, drives far away, turns around, talks with Helena, leaves again. I was like,
drives far away again. Yeah.
What did we learn in this? Like, I didn't feel like we learned much. She asked for the job at MDR again, which we knew she wanted. I guess, are we just learning that Lumen is willing to murder people, but it's not so overt that I could definitely claim they were going to murder her here? It just felt that way.
Yeah, I almost feel like they use this bit to say, okay, could she get back into Lumen in some form or fashion? Like, she had a change of heart, she wants to come back, but and she's such an integral character, I imagine, to this show as a greater arc. I think this is just now cementing that she's going to be involved in the Audie's life somehow. She's going to go back to Mark, she's going to go back to maybe Devin or Rickon. I don't know. Like, I don't think, there's no way she's done, right? But this is kind of confirming she's done with interior Lumen.
I just don't want every episode her to be like driving away, then drive up to the building, get out, look at the building, get in her car and drive away. Like, I don't need that every episode. So, but to your point, it's probably what they're getting at is that she's just done there. Let's talk about our guy outside Mark. He is doing this weird exercise where he's got a digital watch, and before he goes into work, he like starts the timer, runs in, puts it in the drawer, then starts counting. I guess he's trying to time how long it takes him to get from his car into the elevator. And I think he gets to like a minute 30 maybe is what the numbers run out to. But I think this is all because he's trying to burn a message into his retinas so that it will last long enough for his inner Mark to read it, right?
Yeah, this is wild. I like the setup of this because this is played, I think, before. This is like the cold open. So it's him timing it, like, what is he doing here? What is he concocting? What is his plan? And then finding out that his plan is to burn an image into his retinas of the line of like, who is alive, was wild and a bold play, to say the least.
It's who is alive, ? Right? So what is he trying to ask his, like, what, how do you interpret that in terms of what his inside Mark, when his inside Mark sees that in his burned retinas, like, what is that supposed to ask?
I don't know. I was kind of thinking the same thing. Is it like who else in there is alive that he could maybe reach out to? I'm with you. I don't think this was enough to really do much with. As we find out later when like Ragabi talks to him, like, well, what do you expect the Yenny to do to get you a message? And he's like, I don't know. That's his problem to figure out.
Sure. I don't like staring into bright lights, and I'm pretty sure doing this would have given me a migraine. So he lucks into the fact that the doctor shows up and shouts at him and tells him why this is such a dumb idea, which, rude, but she's not wrong. And I think we should normalize doctors yelling at people that are doing dumb stuff. So I'm all for it. They have so now we're with Doctor, and it's Ragabi? Ragabi. Okay. And she's the one that reversed Petey's, and she's also the one that murdered the head of security and seems to be just living life fine, even though she murdered a dude and hid the body, which is fine. they have a discussion where she lets him know that, hey, Gemma is alive, and this is where Mark agrees to reintegration.
Mm-hmm.
I only want to point this out, and I would never be critical of the show other than the parts that are dumb and that I need to be critical of. But Adam Scott's in like some sort of hairpiece during this. His hair is like outrageous. There's I'm not the smartest of dudes, or I don't catch every detail, but like, why was he in a weird wig during all of this? It's almost like this was a reshoot, and he had already shaved his head for some Vietnam Army movie he was in. I don't know.
That's funny. I didn't necessarily clock it, but I mean, I'm all for a guy with disheveled hair, right? Because
Sure.
he was probably freaking out when he finds out. Because this is him getting the confirmation that Gemma might be alive. Like when he was talking to his sister, he thought it was just kind of BS, but now hearing it from Ragabi, it's a whole different game. And I do love how quickly he's like, he doesn't need to be told or convinced about this reintegration. He is, yes, I'll do it. Let's go right now. Like I want to get this done. I do also want to point out though, like Ragabi's conversation with him, like her line of like, "Hey, I've gotten better at this, by the way, right? Because the last guy I did this for, you saw die in front of you or whatever." So I do like that she's apparently getting better, but she tells him like the only way to get information in and out is through this procedure. So how does she know where Mark is going to be? How does she know some of this information? I would imagine she's already done this on one of the characters we are following in the show, where somebody maybe
Really?
is already reintegrated, right? Because how else would she know that's the only way to get info in and out?
Well, my understanding is that she was high enough in the ladder that she knows how this all worked, and I know she tried it on old Petey. But no, my assumption is this is definitely a person that Lumen, if they care enough, should be out there trying to kill.
Yeah.
Which I do think they are in a way, but they're not doing a very good job. She's running amok, murdering their murderers.
Yeah.
But the I just like, does insurance cover this? Is she licensed? Like, so many if someone's going to do stuff to your brain, I think you got to ask a couple more questions. But I guess this speaks to Mark's desperation. He's like, sure, you can set up shop in my basement. Pete's not living there anymore. I don't know where he went, but yeah, let's do brain operations in the basement. And once again, I was going in and out of sleep, so this is all a blur. But I guess they need to link brainwaves together, and there's wires, and they do that sound thing. I don't know. A lot's going on in this, Chong. You were wide awake and clearly focused. Talk me through how they reintegrate Mark.
Yeah, I thought this was a cool scene where and I like the way they visually gave it to us too, where she is kind of asking these questions, and we see that one monitor of like, hey, once these two lines come together, then they are sunk. Like it was kind of cool visual, but they do a little bit where they're like Mark's hand starts shaking, and she kind of has to dial it back. But the other cool thing I think she talks about is like, hey, your brain's got 5 waves, and we see like the 5 colored wires that she is clipping around his head to connect his brain and recalibrate it, I guess. But I would argue these are very reminiscent of the 5 different bins that we have in macro data refinement and them trying to organize stuff in there. I'm not sure if the colors would ever kind of match up, but I thought that's fascinating and just keeps me thinking about this is what they are doing in macro data is likely rebuilding the brain or the consciousness in some form or fashion. When I'm going to assume for Gemma or Miss Scout.
Huh.
Miss Chase.
Interesting. Okay, so you're relating this procedure back to them and the numbers. I did not make that connection at all. But
she's also asking him a bunch of like oddball questions too, which is sort of reminiscent of like when Mark wakes up on the table as like an innie for the first time, and then they're asking him like these, I guess, baseline questions. So as she's like asking him all of these, they eventually allow him to connect. And I really love the shot of like the multiple versions of Mark waking up from the table. And I'm assuming we might get like a flashback maybe when Mark first kind of woke up too.
So if you rewatch it, the questions she's almost asking are an indication of which Mark she's talking to. So she's asking like, hey, what color were your mother's eyes? Which I had to think a little bit hard to remember. And then so she's asking like outside Mark questions, and then she asks him like inside Mark questions. Like I think the shame question was an inside Mark question because like when you go to the break room, you talk about shame and all those things. And then when she gets to what's your first memory and he can't remember, that's that's inside Mark showing up because inside
Right.
Mark wouldn't have first memories. And then we realize his first memory is waking up on the table. Now, I don't know if this is just like cool visuals from the show, but when they do his first memory, it's Mark on the table and they do all those quick cuts and he's in like different outfits. So then the argument is inside of Severance or inside the office, are there multiple Marks, like different Marks waking up on that table in different outfits, not just like one Mark remembering it wrong, if that makes sense. So
That's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I didn't take it that way. I just kind of figured it was like the innie and outie Mark that we know kind of combining and being able to now understand each other's memories. But it is a fascinating concept if he's severed more than once.
yeah, no, it would be great if they made the show more confusing, I guess is where I'm at.
Yeah.
But no, this was super cool. I did rewatch it while wide awake and then started drinking just to try and figure out what life was all about. But there were parts in this episode that lulled a bit, and then it got confusing. And I'm at a point where I want answers and less confusion, which is not going to probably happen for a while. But if we just find out Mark's dead and this is all the subconscious dying before he leaves this mortal plane, I'm going to be upset. But I did enjoy the episode.
Yeah, I've got faith. I think they knew coming into this a story, an overarching story they wanted to tell. And while some of the stuff in the middle might be a little bit wild and crazy, I still think that we're in good hands here. I do want to mention one thing before we start wrapping up is, and this has happened, I feel like in a couple shows or like movies every once in a while, when you are doing a scene that is like very, very dark, and then you cut to credits and it is a bright white screen, and I'm watching it in my home with most of my lights out. Like, come on now. Like, Ben Stiller, you're doing a great job on the show, but don't show me a big white credits thing that says, directed by Ben Stiller, because my eyes were essentially what Audi Mark was trying to do. I feel like that got burnt in my retina.
The struggles of the modern man, Tom. These are the things that we have to fight and overcome, the credit screen being too bright on our eyes. That's probably what woke me up. I was like, oh, show's over. Let's go to bed. It's 9:15, so I'm an old person now. Tom, I don't have any endings or anything else to talk about this episode. I am excited for 4. Are there 10 or 9 in this season? Do you know off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I do not know. Look it up for you while you
that
get
was a
out,
bad question to ask. That's bad podcasting. For those of you that are still listening, we appreciate you. You can reach out to us at teambingepodcast@gmail.com. If you've got a theory, this is one where you can definitely conjecture about, so we'd love to hear from you. We've already heard from Barrett and his confusion. Barrett, I see that hand, and I am with you, buddy. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I think there's a follow. Also, Spotify allows you to leave comments. Please keep them appropriate. Gam reads them, and then I read them to my other Gam in her grave. And so, Tom, what did I miss?
Just to go back to what you said, that we are going to get 10 episodes this season. So I think we had either 8 or 9 last, so now we're getting 10, which I love. But yeah, follow us on the socials, Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, Threads. Let us know what you think about the show. Follow us at Team Binge or at Team Binge Podcast. Again, the community for this show is fantastic, and I love seeing everybody's theories. There's a lot of fun fan art and stuff online from this. People doing deep dives on the color coding of the show. It's just great, and it's a fun community. So please keep engaged and let us know what you think about the show and our podcast. We appreciate you guys listening in.
For Team Binge, I have been Julian.
I have been Innie/Outie, Tom. Till next week, everybody.